Some of your fears aren't yours. You didn't learn them, and you didn't earn them. You inherited them, written into your body before you were born, from an ancestor you never met. This video is about how that actually happens, how a memory can survive a brain being torn apart and rebuilt, and how a fear can be handed down to someone who never lived the thing that caused it. It sounds like mysticism. It isn't. It's two of the strangest experiments in modern biology. In a lab, scientists trained an animal to fear one specific smell, and then watched its children, and even its grandchildren, flinch at that exact smell. Offspring that had never smelled it, never learned it, never once been harmed by it. The fear skipped a whole generation and landed, fully formed, in a body that had no reason to feel it. Which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question about your own mind. How much of what you feel did you actually earn, and how much was handed down to you by someone long dead? To make sense of it, we have to start with an animal that pulls off something even harder to believe, carrying a memory intact through the total destruction of its own brain. Start with why that should be impossible. When a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it doesn't just sprout wings, it dissolves. Sealed inside its case, most of its body breaks down into a kind of living soup, and even its brain is torn up and radically rewired into the mind of a creature that flies. A memory is supposed to be a pattern held in a specific web of brain cells. Tear that web apart and rebuild it, and the pattern should vanish, the way smashing a hard drive erases the file. So the adult should remember nothing of its life as a crawling grub. It should climb out blank, a factory reset. That is the sensible answer. In 2008, a biologist at Georgetown University named Martha Weiss decided to stop assuming it and actually test it with moths. She trained caterpillars to avoid a specific smell, then let them dissolve and rebuild. And the moths that climbed out still avoided it. The paper's title put it plainly: Retention of Memory Through Metamorphosis. And there the story might have ended. A strange footnote in an entomology journal. Except a few years later, a letter arrived from Japan. It was from a boy, barely 10 years old, who had found Weiss's work and was gripped by a bolder question than the one she had answered. He didn't just want to know whether a memory could survive metamorphosis. He wanted to know whether it could travel further than a single life. Over a years-long correspondence, Weiss helped him design his own experiment, run at home, with swallowtail butterflies. Instead of harsh chemicals, he paired the gentle smell of lavender with nothing worse than a mild, harmless shock, until his caterpillars learned to avoid it. Then he let them transform. And just like the moths, the butterflies that emerged still recoiled from lavender. A memory carried across the great dissolving, confirmed this time by a child at his kitchen table. But the boy pushed one step past anyone before him. He let those lavender-avoiding butterflies breed, and then tested their children. The offspring had never smelled lavender, never been shocked, never met the parents who learned the lesson. A striking share of them avoided it anyway. And in some cases, so did the generation after. Grandchildren flinching from a scent their grandparents had been taught to fear. Now, be careful here, because this is exactly where these stories get oversold. His result is genuinely remarkable, but it is one young researcher's experiment, not yet published or independently repeated. A beautiful, open question, not a settled fact. So hold it loosely, but hold it because it points straight back at the promise this video opened with. A memory that doesn't just outlive a rebuilt brain, but seems to leak into a body its owner never lived in. And for a leap that big, a fear arriving fully formed in an animal that never learned it, we need a study built to survive every objection you are already forming. That study exists. In 2014, two researchers at Emory University, Brian Dias and Kerry Ressler, built exactly that. They took male mice and taught them to fear a smell, acetophenone, which to us smells like cherry or almond blossom. Same method, the smell, then a mild shock, until the mice flinched at the scent alone. Then those males had pups. And here is the part that broke the rules. The pups had never smelled acetophenone. They had never been shocked. Many were conceived by IVF and raised without ever meeting their fathers, so there was no chance of learning the fear by watching a nervous parent. And yet, when those pups first encountered the cherry blossom smell, they reacted to it, more startled, more sensitive to it than to any other odor. So did the next generation after them. The grandpups of the original mice flinched at a danger their grandfather had learned and they never had. And it went deeper than behavior. When the team looked inside the pups' noses and brains, they found more of the specific cells tuned to detect that exact smell. The offspring were physically built to notice a threat they had never encountered. The fear hadn't just been passed down as a feeling, it had been passed down as anatomy. So how does an experience, something that happens to a father after he's fully grown, get written into his children? This is where a field called epigenetics comes in, and the idea is simpler than it sounds. Your DNA is the sequence, the raw text of the genome, and that text does not change when something frightens you. But sitting on top of that text is a second layer, a set of chemical marks like highlighter and sticky notes that decide which genes get read aloud and which stay silent. Experience can move those marks, and crucially, some of those marks can end up on the DNA inside sperm and egg cells. When that happens, the note gets copied into the next generation along with the gene. In the mouse study, the father's sperm carried an altered mark on the very gene responsible for detecting that cherry blossom smell. The pups didn't inherit a memory of the shock. They inherited an instruction. Pay extra attention to this one scent, passed in the only language a cell can send across a generation. And it's worth being precise about what did and didn't cross over, because this is where the topic usually gets oversold. The pups did not inherit a scene, no picture of a cage, a shock, a bad afternoon their father had. What they inherited was narrower and stranger, a dial turned up on a single sense. Their world simply arrived pre-tuned to find one smell alarming. Less like inheriting a photograph, more like being born already flinching. That distinction is the whole game, and it's exactly the line most stories about this science blur. Now, mice are not people, and the honest move here is to slow down. Does anything like this happen in us? We can't run the cruel version of this experiment on humans, so the human evidence is softer, more circumstantial, and genuinely debated. But it's not nothing. Start with something well established: the Dutch hunger winter, a brutal famine at the tail end of the Second World War. Researchers found that people who were in the womb during that starvation still carried a distinct epigenetic mark on a growth-related gene 6 decades later. The famine their mothers endured was still chemically legible in their bodies as old men and women. That's metabolism, not memory, but it proves the pipe exists. What one generation lives through can leave a chemical trace stamped into the next. Then there's the work that reaches toward memory itself. The psychiatrist Rachel Yehuda studied the children of Holocaust survivors and found that many carried altered stress hormone patterns and changes to a gene involved in the body's fear and stress response. Echoes, she argued, of a trauma their parents lived and they did not. It's some of the most haunting research in the field and also some of the most contested. The samples are small, and it is genuinely hard to separate a chemical inheritance from simply growing up beside a frightened parent. So hold it loosely, but hold it, because even the possibility reframes something about you. You walk around assuming your fears are yours, earned by your own life, your own scares, your own memories. The mice say that isn't necessarily true. Some part of what you flinch at may have been installed before you drew a single breath, a warning carried out of a life you never lived, from a person you may never have met, about a danger that was theirs and not yours. A caterpillar's memory can survive the ruin of its own brain. A mouse's fear can outlive the mouse entirely and go looking for a body to live in. And somewhere in you, in the thing that tightens when you smell smoke or freezes at a sound you can't place, there may be a memory you never made, still doing its old job, still trying to keep someone safe. Which leaves one last uneasy thought. If your own brain can carry warnings that were never yours to begin with, quietly without ever telling you they're there, then how well do you actually know the mind you fall asleep inside every night? Because it turns out the strangest thing your brain does isn't what it inherits. It's what it does in the last 60 seconds before you lose consciousness. And that's exactly where we're going next.